Thank you, Max. It's great to explore identity, and you've done that great. Next up, we have Gavin Francis, who is a doctor and a writer. He practices emergency medicine as a GP. His books include Adventures in Human Being and Empire Antarctica, which won the Scottish Book of the Year award. He's going to take us on an adventure through the human body. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much. So yes, my name's Gavin Francis. I'm a doctor, I'm a writer, and I'm an enthusiast of life, all kinds of life. And what I'm going to do in the next 15 minutes is take you on an adventure through your own body, a journey through your human being. I'd like the opportunity to be able to go through the whole of it, but I'm just going to choose 3 different areas to talk about. And I'm going to try and share my enthusiasm for all things medical and for the body through those 3 things. I'm going to first talk about the heart and the pulse. I'm going to take you through the face and how we express emotions. And last of all, I'm going to talk to you about the eye. Now, the first thing I want you all to do is raise up one hand, put your fingertips onto your windpipe, and let your fingertips drop down to one side into the hollow that you feel there. Tell me if anyone can't feel a pulse. No, everybody's got their pulse. Great. Now, just feel that for a moment. What I'd like you to do is just be with your pulse for a moment and think. 3 inches above your fingertips, that pulse is coursing into the core of your brain, keeping you alert, awake, hopefully understanding my words. 6 inches below your fingertips, it's going into your heart muscle, keeping that heart beating and keeping that pulsation going. 6 inches either side, it's going down into each arm, keeping your muscles strong and your skin sensitive so you're able to be aware of that. Now, before stethoscopes were invented, doctors used to listen to the beats of your heart by putting one ear directly against the skin of the chest. Now, it's a strange sensation, intimate but also detached at the same moment, to put your ear on the chest of a stranger. I don't necessarily recommend you try it, but it helps if you stick one finger in the other ear. Now, after a while, when you're listening, you begin to hear the sound blood makes as it makes its way through the chambers and the valves of the human heart. Now, if those valves are healthy, you hear quite a clean sound. It sounds a bit like a gloved finger tapping on a leather-topped desk. We're going to try and listen to that just now. So that's what you should hear if your valves are all healthy. If the valves are not healthy, then there's turbulence inside your heart, and you hear a sound much more like a swooshing sound, like the waves on the sea. The classical belief 2,000 years ago was that the heart was just a series of chambers to mix up blood with air sucked down from the lungs, like the way wind whips up waves on the sea. And that's what you hear when you listen to people who have heart murmurs. Now, the pulse is a characteristic of life. And if somebody collapses, as a doctor, the first thing I do is rush, check that they're okay, and feel their pulse, feel if their pulse is still beating. Similarly, if a pregnant woman comes to see me and she's worried about the progress of her pregnancy, one of the first things I do is listen to the sound of the baby's heart inside the womb. And that's a sound, that's quite an extraordinary sound, because you get to hear the mother's pulse, like a slow ocean swell almost in the background. And then over the top, there's the rapid pulse of the baby, like wing beats flying over the top of it all. So I'm going to try that one now, and I want you to listen and hear if you can hear the 2 separate sounds, the slow rhythm of the swell of the mother and the faster beat of the baby. Okay, well, I'll find out later how many of you got it. So, pulse, as I said, is characteristic of life, and we can become aware when our pulse is not beating properly. If your valves start to fail, if your heart is in danger of stopping its rhythm, people can become aware of that. They can develop a conviction that something is wrong with their heart. And doctors have got a name for that conviction. Like so much of their jargon, it's in Latin. They call it angor animi, or anguish of the soul. And it's a conviction that's taken very deeply. It's taken very seriously by doctors. In the emergency departments, I've ordered a CT scan of the chest urgently, almost solely on the basis of a patient's conviction that they were about to die. Sometimes they're right. There are less dramatic instances, though, of when we become aware of when our pulse starts to fade. And that happens every day in the cardiac operating theatres here in the hospital. When the heart is stopped by cardiac surgeons, the pulse is overtaken by a machine and blood is circulated by that machine. And no matter how good the machine, they're not able to adequately mimic the pressure pulse of a beating heart. And afterwards, people often wake up to a third of people who've had open heart surgery, wake up with a syndrome called pump head, which is a disturbance of memory and mood. They become disorientated, disinhibited, and that is because, it's felt by many people to be because they've had a period of time without proper pulsation of their blood. Every so often, somebody comes up with a design for an artificial heart that pumps without need of a pulse. But our humanity and our sense of selves seem to depend on it. Now, I'm going to talk about the face for a minute, but before I talk about the face, I want to ask how many of you have ever laughed so hard that your cheeks began to hurt? Good, that's what I like to hear. So every time you laugh that hard, you give your cheeks a valuable workout. Now, I apologize for the next slide. I'm going to ask you all now for 5 seconds to give me a great big smile. Not a grin, just a smile. Okay? Go. Okay, and relax. Now, I want you all to give me, for 5 seconds, a frown. Good. Okay. Now, I want to ask, which one was easier? Well, definitely is, isn't it? And how did each one make you feel? Just think about that for a moment. Now, when I was just starting out in medicine, and then later on I used to teach anatomy, I used to study very closely the muscles that give expression to our faces. I used to teach people who'd one day become plastic surgeons, inject Botox, do reconstructive surgery, and they had to understand very closely the muscles that give expression to the face. This is a drawing of those muscles. Now, when I was dissecting these faces to demonstrate people how those muscles work, it was a tremendous privilege, really, something that I approached with great respect, moving from the skin, so reminiscent of life, down to the skull, which is so emblematic of death. And as I made that journey down through the face, demonstrating those muscles, I often noticed quite remarkable differences between individuals. Sometimes the muscles that give expression to our smiles that we were just doing a few moments ago, these ones here, would be thick and well-defined, indicating that the individual before me had had a life filled with laughter. Sometimes, instead, it would be the frowning muscles, and these ones up on the forehead, that would be thick and well-defined. And I'd realize this is somebody who'd had a perpetually angry or worried expression. Sometimes I would find one half of the face well-developed and the other half withered, indicating that that individual had survived following a stroke or perhaps Bell's palsy, which is a paralysis of one half of the face. Now, this is a drawing here by Charles Bell. Charles Bell was an Edinburgh anatomist and surgeon who was practicing about 200 years ago. And Bell was particularly fascinated by how knowing more about the expressions of our faces can help painters adequately express emotion. A similar project to Leonardo da Vinci worked on 300 years before him. Bell was the most amazing guy. He was a war surgeon at Waterloo. He practiced both in Edinburgh and in London. And he worked out the course of the nerves, many of the nerves in the head and neck. And he worked out the course of the nerve that gives us facial expression. That's why if somebody can't move part of their face, we call it a Bell's palsy. Now, one of the interesting things about Bell's palsy, as a doctor, when I see people suffering from it, is not just how some individuals find it disabling, not having a symmetrical face, but also how many people seem to feel that when you can't express your emotions properly, it changes the way you actually feel. Charles Darwin worked this out 100 years ago in his book on the expression of emotion in man and animals. He wrote this wonderful line. He wrote, "He who gives way to violent gestures will increase his rage. He who avoids the signs of fear will not experience fear in greater degree." So he pointed out that if we show signs of fear, we get more fearful. If we show signs of happiness, we get happier. How we are becomes who we are. It's something I have to become very aware of in the clinic. Now, the last part of the body I was going to tell you about was the eye. This is an eye made flat, but I want you to imagine looking at it, the inside of an eyeball, as if it's curved behind you. Now, my medical office has got a large east-facing window, and for most of the year I examine my patients in natural light, but the exception is when there's something wrong with their vision. And then I have to go to the window, close the blackout blinds, and then feel my way in darkness back towards the chair where the patient sits. Once I've found the patient, I take an instrument called an ophthalmoscope, one of these. I put it close against my own eye, and then I move to within millimeters of the patient's eye, looking right in through their pupil. Now, there are a few examinations more intimate. Usually my nose ends up bumping into their nose, cheeks touch, and usually both of us, through politeness, end up holding our breath. It's an amazing experience to project somebody's inner eye so neatly into your own from a distance of millimeters. You can only see a small patch at a time, and it's a little like looking up at the night sky with a telescope. Sometimes I see white, fluffy patches on the back of the eye caused by diabetes, and they look a bit like cumulus clouds. Sometimes if someone has high blood pressure, you get a silvered shine on those zigzag arteries, and it looks like jagged forks of lightning. Sometimes if the central retinal vein blocks, you get this big scarlet flood called a stormy sunset appearance by the textbooks. The first time I looked up into the curved vault of a patient's eyeball, it was like one of those medieval diagrams that shows the heavens as an upturned bowl. Now, it wasn't doctors who first figured out how the eye actually works. It was astronomers. 400 years ago, when telescope technology and lens technology was transforming the way we understand the world, astronomers realized that the classical idea, which is that the eye beams out energy into the world, couldn't be true. Isaac Newton famously took a big blunt darning needle called a bodkin. He stuck it behind his own eye and then wiggled it around in order to record the effect of indenting his retina. There was a German astronomer called Johannes Kepler who was the first to realize it wasn't the lens that was actually sensitive to light, it was the retina. He wrote very beautifully of how vision occurs by the retina communicating with the folds of the brain. Now, there's a very tiny crack of light coming in through the back of the room here. And I want you all to think for a moment that that crack of light streaming in here, those photons were born 8.5 minutes ago in the core of the sun through nuclear fusion. 5 minutes ago, they streaked past the orbit of Mercury. 3 minutes ago, they went past Venus. The light that doesn't hit our planet will reach Mars in about 4 minutes' time, Saturn in about an hour. Now, we can taste what's in our mouths, we can touch what's within our reach, we smell within hundreds of meters, we hear within tens of miles, but it's only through our vision that we're in direct communication with the sun and with the stars. Now, I started off this talk by asking each of you to hold your own pulse, and I just wonder if you would do that again for a moment. Now, that pulse keeping you alive is a reminder your body is amazing, its intricacy is truly extraordinary. Now, I want you to celebrate it, enjoy it, and think about that, appreciate it for as long as your pulse keeps beating. Thank you very much.